I'm Pat Soldano, president of Family Enterprise USA. If you don't know who we are, we advocate for family-owned businesses across the United States, all sizes and all industries. We work on tax and economic issues that affect the families of those family businesses. Very pleased to have with us today Whittier Trust, who is a sponsor of Family Enterprise USA. We really thank them for that sponsorship. And I think the topic is one that is very important, and there's a lot of interest in this topic. So today's topic is Stronger Together, Building Governance that Preserves Wealth for Generations. This webcast will explore practical steps to building effective family governance, including the structures, education, and systems that strengthen both the family and the business. Our speakers today are Liz Anderson, who is Vice President, Whittier Trust, Brian Bissell, who is Senior Vice President, Client Advisor, and Ashley Fontanea, who is Senior Vice President, Client Advisor. Very pleased to have you all on this webcast with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
It's great to be with all of you today, and just really want to thank you for inviting us, Pat. And thank you to all the Family Enterprise USA sponsors who, like Whittier Trust, support the good work that Pat and her team do for family-owned businesses. I'm going to begin with a few housekeeping notes. You're welcome to submit questions in the chat during the webcast, but we'll wait to answer them at the end of the program. We started with a list of 46 questions that you all submitted at registration. Thank you so much for taking the time to share these with us. They are all great questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can today. We promise to follow up with you after the program if you submitted a question that wasn't answered. As Pat mentioned, Brian, Ashley, and I work for Whittier Trust, which is the oldest and largest multifamily office headquartered in the West. We have 10 offices serving clients in 42 states. We work with more than 600 successful families, many of whom built their wealth and legacies through family-owned businesses. Today's program will unfold in two parts. First, Ashley will define governance, highlight what makes family business wealth difficult to navigate, and offer guidance on best practices. Then Brian will share a case study that played out for one of our clients. We've changed the details, of course. The illustration shows how implementing good governance can protect the family and the business in ways that many families might not imagine. I'll let Ashley take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. So first, let's define what is governance. And in the context of what we're discussing today, what is family governance? Generally, it's a formal structure that's put in place around mutually agreed upon rules of the road for roles and responsibility, communication, decision-making, and management of shared assets. And what do we mean by shared assets? That could be an operating business. It could be a piece of property. It could be intellectual property. It may be all of the above. Family governance also comes in different forms. Family governance might look like a family constitution or charter. It may entail regular meetings, perhaps with deliverables from the participants. At the very least, an expectation that participants will have prepared and read materials in advance of their meetings. If that family governance definition doesn't pertain to you and your family, maybe it looks slightly different. Perhaps it's defined as the protection or perpetuation of your family legacy. And that could be a legacy of values, it could be a legacy of traditions. It could simply be the legacy of your family name. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of the old adage, from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And unfortunately, that saying has withstood the test of time because this idea of family governance and stewardship across multiple generations is very hard to do. It can be hard to get it right. And so what we aim to do today is to provide some tools and some examples to help you or the families you work with define what governance means to you and how to implement a practice of family governance thoughtfully and intentionally. So we've outlined a few common steps that we feel are best practice in implementing family governance process for individuals and their families. Step 1 is establishing a shared vision and mission. And what I'll encourage here is that whether you already have a family governance plan in place or you're looking to design one, that you think carefully about who's invited to participate in this first step. Those who are at the table, having their voice heard, and also participating in the conversation that leads to the final definition of the vision and mission for a family are those most likely to have buy-in for that plan going forward. So I would consider that if you'd like to have multiple generations follow suit with this family governance plan and or buy into it over time, then you really ought to invite them to the table. And in addition to multiple generations, this may extend beyond your family bloodline. It's, of course, a case-by-case scenario, and only you would know who best to bring around the table at the time. But I'll share a quick example. We were brought in on an instance in which a family governance plan was in place, the family constitution had been written up, and Whittier was engaged at that time as part of a family retreat to implement the plan and roll it out for the family. And upon disseminating the plan around the table, we quickly learned that the spouses were never invited to participate in creating this document, nor had they ever seen it before. So around the table, we heard things like, "What is this? And you expect me to do what?" It became a problem. So as you might imagine. So where that led us was to come back to this step number 1 and, bring us back to the first building block of good family governance, which is to make sure all of the stakeholders have a voice in designing the plan that you'd like them to implement in the future. Step 2 is building the family governance structure. And now in this step, not one size fits all. This really is where the planning becomes highly customized to your own family dynamics, your own family need. I wouldn't shy away here from being more formal than less so. It may not feel right for you that you need something that's so rigidly defined or strict in today's generational formation. But I would encourage you to think of this as a document that's meant to withstand the test of time. And as we all know, as the family tree grows, the branches get farther apart. And to have a formal document in place that might feel a little rigid to your current tightly knit family, as those relationships extend further and further out, family members generations from now may only meet to convene at a business board meeting or an annual family gathering. And so a more formal structure for them can be very advantageous. So I would caution that as you're building out the plan, it's okay for it to feel a little bit more buttoned up and structured because I think that will lead to better long-term results. And then number 3, developing a family education program. This is probably one of the most important steps if you want your plan to succeed. There's many, many ways to do it, to implement education in whatever form that means to you. It's not so much a matter of, how you do it. I think it's just more important that you do it. And education is not just something that's targeted to younger generations of the family. To demonstrate a value of lifelong learning and also to demonstrate commitment and engagement with the family governance planning, that everyone's willing to show up and dedicate the time and the effort to make this work. I think it's a best practice for all members to participate in some form of education. But it is something that I believe is a non-negotiable. This is an opportunity to demonstrate commitment to the plan. And hey, a little education all across the board can't hurt. Lastly, managing and creating a family office. And we feel this is an important step as an anchor to making sure that the plan can be implemented with consistency and continuity going forward. Sometimes this comes in the form of an outside third party that's helping to steward the plan and its implementation going forward. Other times, in the case of perhaps a family with an operating business, you can leverage the infrastructure of your operating business and the individuals therein to help manage through the governance process. Really to create, as I mentioned, consistency, but also accountability to stick to the plan, and that the plan isn't something that's simply created and then stuck up on a shelf, but is brought back in all aspects of decision making or questions around how to come to a decision, that the plan is utilized and adhered to.
So Ashley, as Liz said in the beginning, we did get a lot of questions from people that registered for this webcast, and I see we have a question in the chat. And Tim, if it's okay, I'm going to hold the questions in the chat till the end for just now, because we had so many questions from people who registered. So let's get into a few of those, Ashley, right now. What are some of the best practices for a family office just implementing governance? What are the non-negotiables, and what's the order of priority to remember?
Sure. Well, I would refer back to these steps here. I think we have tested and worked through these steps in a number of occasions and find that the order of operations does matter. So beginning with coalescence around a shared vision and mission, shared again being the operative word, that all parties participating do mutually agree to the vision and mission. That's the cornerstone of what's built from there. Building out the structure is, of course, done. It can be done with experts providing guidance, but also, tailoring to meet your family needs. It's got to be custom fit. And then the education is, again, the non-negotiable. That I think will not only strengthen the practice of family governance, but it can instill the value of why this governance model exists for future generations in terms of the why. Why do we stick to this? Why do we have this planning? Why does our family operate in such a way? Education is the key as a through line for multiple generations to come.
So you kind of answered Tim Schultz's question, which is what levers are there to enforce non-negotiable in a family governance? And Tim, if you want her to expand on that, you can certainly put something in the chat. But let's move on to one of the other questions, because as I said, we had many. How do you overcome this governance failures, which I hear a lot about with family businesses and family offices?
Brian, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, I think I think one thing that we really think about here is that failure is not necessarily a negative thing. It's where some of our best lessons come from. So really letting the family understand that we're going to make progress with each failure, and that there's if something doesn't take the first time, it's not the end of our attempts at trying to get it right. You know, a lot of the consultants we work with have different approaches to structuring this family governance, and sometimes the approach just doesn't work with the family, and that, you know, manifests and feels like a failure. But you try the next approach with a different group and a different consultant, and next thing you know, they're off and running, and everything's working smoothly. So I think failure is often looked at as a negative, but we see the positive side of it, and that some of our best lessons come from that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We definitely learn from our failures. So the next question revolves around stock, and we get this question a lot in many of the subjects that we put on is when families are trying to structure their ownership or transition from one generation to another. And that is, what advice do you have on how to govern voting shares versus common shares?
I'll take this one, Ashley. I think this is a very, you know, customized solution here. There's no one size fits all. You can do it any which way. But what we've seen a lot of families do with some success is they've kept the voting shares with the family members that are actively involved in the business, and they've distributed the common shares held by the members that aren't actively working in the business. So it was one way to divide it. It's still allows for the non-working family members to participate in the upside and be involved and connected, but it allows for maybe a little less disruption on business decisions that need to be made. And so we've seen it done that way a lot.
That makes sense. So I'm not sure who's going to take this next one, but how do you get people re-engaged and back in the process when they've been pulling away?
I can speak to this one. It's common that you'll have individuals who are more interested in the concept of family governance than others. And so you typically have those in a leadership or, cheerleading position to get the family engaged and moving in one direction. And others who may not think it applies to them or may not think there's much value to it. Most of the time it happens where the disengagement comes from not seeing themselves in the plan, not seeing themselves as part of the plan, or not feeling as though they're welcome to really have their voice heard. So what I would encourage is that, and most of the best consultants that we've worked with will always start this process with individual outreach to every single stakeholder, one-on-one conversations in which they can confidentially share, their thoughts, their feelings on whether or not this is something they think will work or not. Sometimes that's the issue too, is they think all this work and it's not gonna pan out. So to hear out what what the feelings might be, what the perception may be for those individuals, that can also then be managed into the process. If you know where they're coming from, you can speak to those points and assuage some of those fears or those perceptions as the plan comes together. And in a very behind the scenes way, manage towards those individuals so they see themselves in the plan and they hear some of their ideas that perhaps they aren't comfortable sharing at the table, but they've shared one-on-one with you. You can find ways to seed those in to the process in a way that might perk up their attention that, wow, I am being taken seriously, or I am being included in this process.
Makes sense. So this is the last question in this section. Who is responsible for establishing a governance structure?
Brian, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think we've seen it, play out in that it's the responsibility of whoever the leading generation is of the time. So, taking stock in where you're at in that generational transition, have the founders already moved it to Gen 2 and now Generation 2 is sitting at the leadership table? I think it should start with the leadership table, and who's currently in charge. But like we said earlier in the program, they're responsible for starting it, but to have it really take foot and have buy-in, they need to include all of the generations in that planning.
As we address family governance as a multifamily office, which is what Whittier Trust is, we came to realize that, we don't necessarily have all the answers, and our clients' needs are so nuanced and so unique to each individual case that our approach to family governance has taken on this format that we share with you today. We went through a comprehensive search for some of the best consultants in family businesses and family governance across the country. So many great resources exist outside of our geographies that we looked far and wide, connected with some fabulous individuals from backgrounds that you see in the box at the upper left, with specific backgrounds that pertain to family governance and family business. And, in our role as the number 4 of our step, having someone to manage and implement through the process, that's the role we take. We do have insights, of course, to share throughout the process, but we find that it's most effective for us to sit in the seat of walking side by side with our families and our clients through the process and making sure that they get the most out of it in utilizing and leveraging the best of the best resources that are out there. So how to go about doing that and organizing our thoughts. Once we did that comprehensive search, we interviewed probably, close to 30 professionals in various, areas of expertise related to family governance. And we came up with this matrix where we organize it into 4 key areas that are typically drawn from to create a holistic family governance plan. You rarely stick with just one quadrant. You oftentimes need to pull in people from various areas on this map. But generally speaking, the quantitative specialists generally have a background in various types of law. Over to the right, family operating business specialists will have expertise in exit planning and other succession planning topics that pertain to operating a family business. The qualitative aspect always tends to have a place in here, which is related to family dynamics, interpersonal issues, and decision making. And then over on the far left, shared family assets, we were looking for individuals with a strength in helping discuss human capital and financial assets, as well as philanthropy. And so within this matrix, we present this to the families that we're working with to say, where are your greatest needs and which consultants or experts would provide you with the best and most relevant information. And then on the following page, you can just see kind of where our search took us. We have consultants that are based all over the country. In today's age of virtual consultations, of course, you can engage with people who are pretty much anywhere. And I know they all do travel to where the families are based, but it's just a matter of showing that this idea of family governance and expertise in developing and strengthening family governance, I would say, is certainly on the rise. As you can see from the breadth of consultants that are available to support families in this space, where they're located. A number of them also came out of university programs in family business and family governance that may no longer be practicing, and so they've spun off into private consulting. So all that to say, we have some really strong experts who've been doing this for years and have a lot of value to share. And this model, this matrix model, is really, I need to give credit to Brian. This was his brainchild, and I think it's helped us very, very much so in being more efficient with identifying the right resources for families and engaging people from across various sectors to meet the differing needs of the families we work with. Brian, anything you'd like to say to that?
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job explaining it. I think one thing we've found with a lot of families we come in contact with is that have trouble understanding the difference between one of these consultants and a multifamily office or a family office function, right? So they will meet and they'll identify their own need for family governance planning, and they will find their way to one of these consultants and solve for X, Y, or Z. But that consultant then, their engagement ends and the family's on their own, and they really have trouble implementing it or perpetuating the structure that's been put in place. So I think that having this family office role is something that can help really take a family constitution that was formed and get it through from Gen 1 to Gen 4, right? I think these consultants are very skilled at what they do, but their time with the family is usually pretty finite and spelled out within like maybe a 12-month period of time. Let's solve for X, Y, or Z, and then we're done, right? So having a group of professionals that can see it through and help implement that education program for when next gen is coming up, or spouses are entering the picture, and I think that's just one thing that's been eye-opening for me, seeing families kind of try to navigate this challenge. And so in this next section, I'm going to talk through one particular family that I think is an interesting case study, because it really shows it really highlights the importance of what we spoke about earlier with the steps of family governance planning, and how you kind of need to respect the order of those steps and not skip any of them and start with step 3. You really have to start with the shared vision, making sure the family dynamic is intact, and everyone has the same goals and objectives. Let's keep the family business thriving for multiple generations. And so we put this illustration together for this family because they, up until the point we met with them, had primarily only focused on the right circle, this blue circle. Their heads were in the business, and the business was successful, but they hadn't thought really about their own individual wealth management needs. I think a lot of their wealth was on paper because it was tied up in shares of the business, and they didn't really realize how valuable that company had been, and didn't even realize they had a need for estate planning, didn't realize they had potentially taxable estates. So I kind of put this Venn diagram together to show, there's two sides of the thought process, and where family governance planning resides is in the middle, where it's that crossover where there's a connection between the family business considerations and your own individual. In this particular family, when we started with them, they had done some estate planning, but they had all gone off and done it individually and not as a collective group. They all had their own estate planning attorneys. They had their own ideas and thoughts on what they wanted to do with their shares of the business. And when we started working with them, initially our arrangement was just as an investment management role. They wanted us to help them invest the idle cash on their company balance sheet. They got to know us a little bit better. They got to know other services and what we do. The founding patriarch wasn't on speaking terms with anyone in Gen 2 because the leadership transition hadn't gone smoothly. He was kind of forced out at one point and forced off the factory floor. And one of the siblings who didn't work for the business was not in communication with anyone either. So when we entered the picture, we realized before we jump into coming up with this governance structure, we need to repair the family dynamic. And that's when we went to our list of consultants that we work with, and we let them interview 2 or 3 groups that we thought this is their specialty. They're really good at jumping in right away and working on that. And they selected a group that geographically was nearby, so that was convenient. But they spent a ton of time with each person individually, got to hear their perspective and kind of where they were coming from and what some of the issues were, and got everyone back on board with at least being willing to come to the table and communicate and work on a way forward collectively and trying to achieve alignment. And so if you go to the next slide here, this is what their family tree looked like. And I think we probably have a diverse audience of where you're at on your business succession planning, and maybe the family tree is a little more straightforward for you. But as time goes on and families grow and expand and more people get involved, it certainly gets more challenging. And in this scenario, everyone in Gen 2, sorry, 3 of the 4 in Gen 2 were involved in the business. But when you go down to Gen 3, only 3 of that entire group were working for the business. And this particular family had a rule about owning shares of the business, and they only would allow you to own shares if you worked for the business. So you can see what challenge that presents when, William and Mary have 2 kids, but neither of them are in the business. The sister Anne doesn't have children, and it was creating a lot of stress and strain on the family dynamic. So first step was repair the family dynamic. Let's get everyone on speaking terms, making sure that communication is going the way it should be. And then they allowed us, they were willing at that point to share all of their individual estate plans. So if you go to the next, let's go down another slide. So we're going to kind of fly through these, but we diagrammed out each estate plan, and you can just see how different everyone's idea was, and nothing was in alignment. And when we finally get down to the summary page, the big eye-opening issue that we brought to everyone was right here, is that sister who had no kids was going to give all of her shares to charity. But then the buy-sell agreements mentioned that the company was going to have to buy back those shares from the charitable organization. So there was going to need cash was going to be needed to execute on that. The other sibling whose kids didn't work for the business, he also was going to have to company was going to have to buy back shares there. And so we got it all on the summary page to show the cash impact on the treasury, and everyone's jaws dropped. They said that this, we can see now why this isn't feasible, and the company's not going to, survive the way we're currently structured. But I think the success story in this whole planning process was getting them all to the table together and being open-minded about working together and moving to step 2 on our best practice list of, okay, now we realize there's an issue. We realize we can't all do this individually in a vacuum. We need to come together and do it as a group. And they've made a lot of progress in now structuring a family governance program that's going to bring their estate plans in line, but also come up with a vehicle that allows them to communicate and make joint decisions. They're working on a family council and a family charter that's going to help guide that transition to generation 3 and keep the business thriving. So I'll stop there, see if maybe we have any questions from the audience.
Okay, so I would like to comment on something that both you and Ashley alluded to, and that is the time to do family governance. It takes a long time, and I really believe it's not something a one and done kind of thing. It's something that is ongoing. And so if a family doesn't understand that from the beginning and they just believe they get a constitution put together and then they just put it on the shelf and that's the end of it, that's really not the way it works, right? That constitution, that governance structure has to succeed generation to generation. So I really encourage those of you who are on the call that to think about it in that context. I think it's really, really important. Um, and Susie, I've asked you to put the question in the chat because we really don't have the ability to unmute you. So hopefully you can do that. So we have a couple questions from Chuck. He says, what is the minimum asset level which makes sense to establish a family office? And I'm happy to weigh in on that too, but I'll let you at Whittier Trust answer that.
Yeah, I don't think there's a minimum asset level. I think a family office can be helpful for any family business. I think the question may be hinting at when does it make sense to have a single family office versus a multi-family office, right? So I think if you wanted to establish your own family office, we're seeing net worth in the billions of dollars making sense to kind of create the brick and mortar, hire a bunch of professionals that can help in various wealth management roles, right? The philanthropic arm, fiduciary and trust services, investment management, all of that. But with a multifamily office like our platform where you can just plug in, it takes a much lower asset level to where that makes sense, I think.
Well, and I would concur with that. And I think people need to understand when the family office industry was really created, even though it was created many, many years ago, but in the, with the Rockefeller family in the 90s, there was a threshold that was talked about $100 million. That world has dramatically changed. I agree with Brian. You have to be in the billions to really support the talent, to hire the talent, to support the infrastructure, to absorb the cost. It's really very, very difficult. And everyone would love to have a family office because you have all these wonderful services and talent that do all this work for you. And that's why I really believe, as you all know, very strongly in the multifamily office model, like a Whittier Trust, because that is going to give you all the services you want at a very reasonable cost, and you're not managing a business. You're letting Whittier Trust manage the business. So I really encourage people to look at that asset level. And as to Brian's point, it really depends on what you want to be as a family office. What are the services you're going to deliver? How many households are you going to serve? Um, how complex are the assets? How complicated is the family? What's the family dynamics? All of those things go into determining whether you should have your own family office or join a multifamily office. And organizations like Whittier Trust can help you determine that. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next question. Um, and that is from Larry. Larry, I think this might be a little in the weeds for this webinar, and I think Whittier Trust could probably reach out to you independently because you're asking about the strategic sale of a minority interest. So Brian, what are your thoughts on that? Would you rather do that offline, or do you want to make comments about that?
I can make a couple comments. I think it's just a strategic consideration. I think every family is looking at all the options all the time. Does it make sense to hold on to our business because the margins are expanding and it's a great industry to be in, and we can see our competitive advantage lasting multiple generations? Or is it going the other way? Or do we have a generation below that's just really not interested? There's so many things that play into that role. The family that I was actually brought up in my case study, they were considering potentially a strategic sale to a minority interest because they wanted to retain control, but you could see that we were looking at a liquidity problem down the road. So they thought maybe this could add to our liquidity and help us with some estate tax issues and maybe strain on the treasury. But families are looking at ESOPs all the time, selling the entire business. I think you really just have to take stock in what is the goal and objective for the collective group.
That's excellent. I think very helpful. So let's move on to the next question. A viewer asks, a family with a non-operating shareholder who has grown accustomed to substantial distributions, we're all aware of those, how do we carefully address this to transition some of these resources to the non-shareholder executive team for retention purposes, and how to increase investment in the operating business, which is, as we all know, the golden goose?
Ashley, do you want to
Sure.
take that one?
I can start out and then you can pitch in with anything else you'd like to add. But I think here, I would say financial modeling goes a long way. It kind of falls into the education category for me. But seeing those numbers play out of what it does, what reinvestment would look like, or what retention of key stakeholders in the company would look like. I guess conversely, what it would cost to replace those stakeholders. All of those can be modeled out. And sometimes seeing that data on paper is enough to help individuals realize that some adjustments should be made. As Brian noted in his case study, I think it was not until it was presented how much the planning, which sounded okay in practice as a narrative, how much that would negatively impact the balance sheet of the family and the family business. It wasn't until those numbers were really presented and we were able to model through the plan in that way that the family then realized, yeah, something does need to shift and adjust. So that's what I would advise. Brian?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay.
So I don't think we have any more questions in the chat, but I have a few I'd like to pose. I'd like to go back to what Ashley talked about at the beginning about the family governance being on the rise, a demand for family governance. I'm certainly seeing that. I usually get almost a call every other week or so with people asking me, what about family governance? How do I solve for it? What are some of the resources I can use? And Ashley alluded to the fact that she sees it on the rise as well. Maybe you could speak to that with your own clients and the demands that you're seeing within your existing clients as well as new clients.
Sure. Well, it certainly does take many shapes. And we see, families that may have had a governance plan in place for some time come to us with frustration over how it's being implemented or that it doesn't quite fit today's circumstances. And so, I think it falls in line with what we also raised earlier about failure, how to address failure. I think Brian and I both, we don't necessarily see these challenges as failures, but simply, the opportunity to revise and refine and maybe reframe the planning to fit today's needs, to fit where the family is today, whether it's the generation's engagement with family business or the family business has sold and we've moved on to other shared assets. How we continue to refresh and revise this governance plan, pull it off the shelf, make sure it's being used, similar to, as often as you would review your living trust to make sure that situations are still accurately depicted and things are still outlined the way you'd like them to go. So it's making this a living document. It's making sure that we're constantly coming back to, making the plan relevant, but also addressing any pain points as they arise. I would encourage, whether you're an individual with a plan or an advisor helping a family to walk through and implement their plan, don't let the pain points get larger and louder. Let's address them head on as they come up, because oftentimes it presents an opportunity to do things better.
And I'll just add that, the title of our presentation is Stronger Together, and I think it really has to be a compelling story as to why you're stronger together. And it has to be something that the stakeholders see value in it and want to be. It's not something that can be forced. I think we run into a lot of issues where and I think Tim Schultz kind of alluded to it. He's like, how do you enforce the non-negotiables? It's like you can't. It's not something that should be forced, and you can't force a next gen to be involved in the family business if they don't want to be. It's just it has to be a compelling story as to why there's good value to being involved, um, and why it makes sense for them, and why the family is stronger together. That all has to be a really compelling story. But I'd also say that you have to allow for off ramps in this thing. I think the biggest conflicts I've seen arise is when a family member that just wants to go off on their own and do their own thing doesn't have an easy way to do that.
And let's talk about who needs family governance. We work with hundreds of families all over, family businesses all over the United States. And what if I'm a family business? I'm 300 employees, strong operating business. Um, First generation is passed, second generation is running the business with third generation, who let's say is in their 20s, 30s maybe. The next generation's starting to be born. We're thinking about the future. And of course, we want to transition this business generation to generation, not only for our family members and our community, but also for our multi-generation of employees that we have working in the business. Are we somebody that needs family governance, and what does that look like?
Ashley, you want to take that one?
Sure. I would say yes. And in the design of what family governance looks like in this particular case, it will have to fit the mold for that family. But I believe starting the process and walking through those 4 steps that we outlined is instrumental in gathering consensus as to what family values are and what the mission is that we strive to live out and to protect with this governance plan. Why do it? Building that plan and educating as to why it's important and what's in it for them. What is the value? What is the story behind it? And then maintaining it going forward. I think those 4 steps, if we just, as simple as can be, can frame those to each family in circumstances like you outlined, Pat, it does fit. It fits every single family with shared assets.
Well, so my last question for you is more specific as it relates to how you all operate, which is, if I'm a family business like I described, and I contact you and I say I really need family governance, I believe I need it. How do you work with me? I assume it's a team approach. So who's on my team? How does it start? And who am I going to be meeting with on a regular basis?
Yeah, so we build teams around the needs and challenges of individual families. So, a family we recently met with has a lot of real estate. So a person um, on your team would be someone from our real estate department. If they had a large family foundation as um, part of their family, we'd have someone from the philanthropic services join the team. You usually always have a client advisor like myself or Ashley, who's the quarterback of the relationship, and will be able to see the entire playing field and know, which resources are needed when, are kind of plugged into the internal resource network, but also our external network of advisors as well. But yeah, it's certainly a team is formed around and kind of customized around a family's needs.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you all so much for the presentation today. Does anyone have any final words?
I'll just add that I'll repeat what I said early on. We had so many wonderful questions. They're so interesting, and we're eager to address each one of them. So all 3 of us will reach out to you and make sure that you have your questions answered, and maybe you've come up with a few more. We're happy to do that too.
Well, thank you for that, Liz. And thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate it. Really thank my panelists. I think this was an exceptional webcast. And thank you for Whittier Trust for being a sponsor of Family Enterprise USA. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.